Welcome into Tampa to Casey Phillips here with staff writer Brianna Dix. We are here already, week 3. It's flying. Time flies when you're winning, right? We're a fan.
That it does. Do it.
And these shows are even more fun to do when we're winning. We have so much to get to. As always, we're going to talk about the previous game, look forward to the next game, everything that stands out to us. We've got a new segment we're going to try out today. I think it's going to be one we start doing moving forward. A little tease there to stay till the end. All right. So let's start out with the takeaways from the Saints game. What stood out to you? What are the biggest things that, after having this week to look back at it, write about it, dissect it, what have been the big themes for you?
I think the biggest thing for me was the defensive surge, right? That kind of spearheaded this team to victory. And I mean, in the fourth quarter, in less than 12 minutes, Jamel Dean had 2 interceptions.
Casual.
Yeah, which is fine. Great awareness, ball tracking. And then you had Mike Edwards with the pick 6, which, kind of originally lined up deep, looked like he was going to be in that too-high shell, then came down as a robber, undercut Jameis Winston's pass. And then you had Devin White and Shaq Barrett that absolutely led the assault on Jameis Winston all throughout the game. Shaq had 2 sacks, the forced fumble. Devin led the team in tackles. And I think really both have kind of taken a step forward this year. I mean, even Devin White, coaches specifically said this year that he's kind of has a better understanding of the system, of the scheme, and it's just been absolutely playing lights out all around the football. So I think for me, that was where the excitement level this week was coming in, is just the dominance that unit has played with. I mean, at this point, they're in the top 5 in nearly every statistical defensive category. They're giving up the fewest amount of yards. They're leading the league in sacks. So I think a lot of just excitement, looking forward to what this unit can do throughout the stretch of the season.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I'm glad you brought up Devin, because he already has as many sacks as he had all last year, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And now, granted, I know part of that is because he didn't have the sack numbers last year he expects of himself, wants.
Yeah.
But it's great to see him already get back on track with that. And I know coaches will always say that splash plays are great for getting you to a Pro Bowl. They're not the only thing that matters in terms of how they grade a player out. So they're like, look,
pressures is almost what they look at.
Yes,
more than
pressures.
sacks.
I mean, even quarterback hits, tackles for loss, a whole bunch of things, or even just like you did your job to run fill. There's so many things that will not necessarily pad a stat sheet that still mean you're playing a great game. But I know that splash plays can make a huge difference in the game, and that's what we saw in the Saints, is that things like turnovers, things like sacks, they're not the only indicator. They may not even be the best indicator, but man, can they turn a game around, and they can change the attitude and the hype, especially on the road, silence that crowd, and to see Devin getting some of those is amazing. And when it comes to the turnovers, I think that Antoine Winfield Jr. told me that their goal is 30 interceptions this year as a unit, which is a lot. It's a fair amount. It's definitely, you're not taking any games off from getting picks when you're trying for that many. So I think that it shows that the emphasis they've put on it, and that is working.
Yeah.
And I know that just like what you mentioned about the understanding of the defense, it feels like this whole group of guys have essentially grown up in this system now. That this is the beauty of having continuity, where Todd Bowles is the guy that has gotten to mold them, shape them in their careers, and it feels like you're seeing the fruits of that now.
Yes.
Where the mental side, they're there. They know, and it's that instinctual, because that's the difference in an interception or just a tipped ball.
Yes.
Is that 100th of a second where it is now instinctual for you, and you're not having to think. And Jamel Dean, I interviewed him yesterday for the radio pregame show, and I said, what's the difference for you? What has happened since you came in rookie year that has led to you're getting listed as the starter on the depth chart, you're getting some of these picks early, what has changed? And he said that he approached it a little differently this offseason from a mental standpoint of the work he put in. And he said he talked to not only defensive coaches, but offensive coaches, learning how he needed to view things from the other side of what are you telling the wide receivers? What are you telling guys?
What do you focus on? What are your tips? What are your keys?
Yeah, so he got both sides of it, and he said he felt like he just got such a more complete picture mentally of how to prepare for the game, and you could tell he was really proud that he was seeing the fruits of that extra labor that he said. He's like, yeah, I feel like it has already paid off what I did this offseason, and that's so exciting that this early in the year, the mental side is already there, because sometimes that takes a while during the season to catch up. And so to already be there in week 2, it feels like they can only go up from here.
Right.
Which is crazy.
When I think the depth, too, that they have has really helped things as well. When you had Logan Ryan come in, when you had Keanu, that's allowing Antoine to play in his strengths, play all these different roles, play predominantly in the slot to utilize his physicality against the run. He can draw it back up, all these different things. But even on the defensive line, keeping those fresh legs, rotating guys, and now Devin, you have him as kind of your focal point in the blitz packages, but they've got so many different things, and I think, we'll see more of Logan Hall, the rookie this season, or this coming game against the Packers with, Akeem Hicks injury. But, just a lot of those pieces that you're seeing come together that's really exciting come to fruition.
Yeah, and I know we are going to next talk about some of the injury stuff and roster updates, but my last little takeaway from the Saints game is kind of related to that I'm just amazed at this offensive line. I am so impressed that if you would have told me one of those, what if I told you the 30 for 30 ideas, that you would be down to your third left tackle. And you'd be fine. That's incredible.
Yes.
That's so shout out to Brandon Walton for sure. But also just the whole line, the offensive line coaches. You've got so many new people, and they always talk about that unit more than any other. It is about that communication, cohesiveness, chemistry.
Continuity.
Yes. And to watch how you got Hainsey in there for the first time, Luke Gedeke in there for the first time, even Shaq Mason, who has experience but new to this line, third left tackle. Tristan Wirfs is it. He's the only dude that was doing it last year.
Holding
down the fort, man.
Standing.
And for them to keep Brady as clean as they did,
Yeah.
to still be able to produce the way that they did, I just was very impressed by that, and it gave me a lot of faith. Because I feel like offensive line is typically the one where you're like, oh my gosh, if you lose someone, it just feels devastating. And to know that this group, the way they stepped up together and still held that fort down, that was a huge takeaway for me. So let's talk a little bit about the injury and roster updates. First of all, let's go through some of the roster things that have happened this week and who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out, all of that stuff. There was a lot that went on. So fill in people a little bit on some of that and some of those moves.
Some of the players that haven't practiced at all this week, you had Chris Godwin, who's still working his way back from the hamstring injury. You didn't have Julio Jones, the knee injury, and then Akeem Hicks is kind of, I think, one of your big ones, hasn't practiced this week. And even, Casey Rogers said yesterday that you're going to have guys step up. You're going to have to see more of Logan Hall, which I think they said they're starting to see it click for him. Obviously has, the violent first punch, has all of those athletic abilities and the intangibles that they saw when he was in college, in the interior, and just what he's able to bring as a catalyst. But then also you've got other guys like DeAndre Sinat and different people that can help offset that. And then, of course, they brought in Cole Beasley, who's been added to the practice squad, and obviously, former Cowboy. But I think will be a nice addition because, I think a lot of people forget, you haven't had Chris Godwin, who's been just that dynamic player out of the slot, that yards after catch threat. But also, you don't have Rob Gronkowski anymore. That was Brady's go-to target over the field. His target on those short passes, the intermediate routes, able to box out defenders. You don't have a guy that's been able to do that. So Cole Beasley is a person that can come in, can be dynamic in the interior and help out when people are playing, the shallow zones, and he can make plays and he can exploit, those defenses' weaknesses, which is something that I think they've needed because we haven't really seen some of the production from, the tight ends this far that you'd want to. So I think he's somebody that can come in and help out the offense and kind of get things going in the passing game.
How much do you expect to see him Sunday? Do you expect to see him Sunday? How much, the role he might have? That's a quick turnaround, but he's been in the league a long time. He's a vet that seems like the kind of guy that could pick up some things quickly, but how much do you think they're going to be asking him to do?
I think it would be kind of a snap count initially. Like if they do elevate him to the active roster this Sunday, I don't think you're going to see him play a ton just to see. And even Todd Bowles said, we're still kind of trying to see where he's at. They're still going through the verbiage. They're seeing how much where he is at in terms of being in shape. Since he left Buffalo. So I think all of those factors are gonna come into play as to what they decide will dictate how much he plays on Sunday.
and we talked about the whole practice squad and elevation. There were several different moves this week. I'll just kind of run through them in case people haven't seen. First of all, Gio Bernard and Josh Wells both sent to IR. So now we know that. And then also you have Kalen Geiger, Deidre Sonata, as you mentioned, and linebacker Kenny Young are upgraded to the active roster. And then you have Cole Beasley, and then a guy that people might recognize his name, Khalil Davis. Buccaneers drafted him a while back to the practice squad, and a guy named Justin School for the offensive line. So that's some of the moves. And then, of course, we haven't mentioned the fact that there will be no Mike Evans this week, that other unfortunate roster move.
So one-game suspension.
Yes. So basically looking at this wide receiver group, what do you think the expectations are this week? And do you think it is going to be another one that has looked like the last couple games of this is going to be a run first and maybe second and third team?
Yes. I think you're going to see more of the same. You're going to try to get Leonard Fournette involved. You're going to try to get Rashad White maybe on some of the perimeter runs and create that balanced attack to where you're taking some of that pressure off of the offensive line. Because, I mean, they're going up against one of the best interior defensive lines in the NFL. You have Kenny Clark, who is an absolute menace. They're going to be bringing guys, so you need to try and offset that. And so I think they're going to try and do that with the run. They're going to do that with the perimeter attack. You're going to do that over the middle to get things working. And then when they have to allocate resources towards the offensive line by stacking the box, well, then you can have favorable one-on-one matchups to the outside, like you saw that Brady was able to have with Brashad Perryman with that one-on-one when he had the touchdown. So I think that's going to be one of the big things this week that we're going to see.
Yeah, so my next question was going to be keys to the game. And
Yes.
Is it safe to say that for you, the biggest one would be getting the run game going?
Yes, but I would also say one of the biggest things that the coaching staff has stressed this week is just the situational football, being better on those short yardage situations, being better in the red zone, and being better on third down. Because they were in favorable field position, but then you had the fumble. They were stopped short of the 4th and 1. So, I mean, these are all things that you're going to have to be able to work through. And then defensively, it's going to be stopping the run. Because the Packers have that incredible 1-2 punch of Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. And their receiving core is a little bit, it's revamped. And they're in that rebuilding phase. You have rookies, Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, that are still trying to engender that trust of Aaron Rodgers. And so as they work through that, you've got Aaron Jones that's taking the bulk of the carries, but really they're good complements for one another in that Aaron Jones kind of elevates their screen game and has that shifting distance space. But then you've got A.J. Dillon that's, got the power through the tackles, kind of that battering ram style of runner. And so they complement each other very well. And that's going to be a huge thing for this defense and being able to stop that and setting the edge. Because there's nothing more demoralizing than getting gashed on the ground.
Yeah, and it's so interesting the similarities between these two teams right now and that they are not probably the storylines that we would have expected.
Yes.
That to be saying that a matchup between Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, and we're just like, man, hope the run game gets going. It's just such a funny thing to think about. And if a few weeks ago or even, a few years ago, maybe you hear that, it'd be like, wait, what? But even looking at the injury reports, it's going to be interesting to see for them. So what we talked about, the wide receiver core, already just like you put it, revamped, which is a positive way of saying that they lost some people and are working on the new people.
Adams.
Yeah, lost a rather important piece there. So now you have Randall Cobb, who has not participated because of illness both days.
Yeah.
You have Alan Lazard, who, this is what's interesting too. Alan Lazard, Sammy Watkins, and Christian Watson, all three went from limited to did not participate.
Yeah.
So that's always the thing about injury reports that can tell you something is you typically don't want to see guys get downgraded throughout the week. You're hoping it's going the other direction. So for them, I'm like, man, both teams are looking pretty banged up in that area. And already that may be very handy. We appreciate them, matching us on the injury report there with all these wide receivers. And then also their offensive line, they've finally, gotten a few pieces back, but still David Bakhtiari, he went from did not participate to limited. So maybe this is the first time you see him. I don't know if he'll be available or not. That's a big piece on their line. But I do think that knowing this, it could be a little helpful of trying to get some pressure. I was thinking about guys like Shaq, like Joe Tryon going against some tackles that have had some injuries. But at the same time, they can really only tee off if you're able to stop the run.
Yeah.
And knowing that this is, looking at all those wide receivers that have been injured, it's just, the Packers are going to be trying to run the ball. And that's been the Bucs' area of strength. I know coaches said that they felt like they didn't love some of this last week.
Right.
That
the way that it was headed.
And especially to me, I think it'll be interesting to watch the first series because both games so far, the first drive of the opposing team has resulted in some pretty big gashed runs.
Yes.
And that it felt like the first drive, the defense, a little shaky.
Kind of finding their bearings.
Yeah, and then after that, lockdown.
Yeah.
It changed immensely. So I think to watch that opening drive, especially at home, when you can get that crowd behind you on defense right away, I think if you can get a 3 and out on that first drive,
that's what I was just about to say.
like that's going to be that this home crowd's first time seeing this team.
Gain all of the momentum.
Yes, I think that's going to be huge to see if they can switch how they are acting on that first drive, lock down the run game, get the Packers feeling like they're not going to be able to rely on it. Trying to figure out their pass game, and then that's when you see guys like Joe and Shaq get to tee off
and force them to be one-dimensional.
Yes, and we saw like Jamel Dean got the pick 6 against Rodgers the last time they played them at home, and that was
it's a rarity,
a massive shift. That game was going poorly for the Bucs, and that play shifted everything. And I feel like such a similar thing could happen in this game. I think that'll be really interesting. So how about for you, either some key individual matchups or a player that you're very excited to watch?
I think for me, one of the biggest ones is going to be Robert Hainsey against Kenny Clark. I think it's telling when you have, especially for a nose tackle, to be the one that all of the coaches, Brady himself, have talked about this is one of the top tier in the NFL.
Now we know what it's like to be preparing against Vita.
Yeah,
It's the same thing.
This guy absolutely just pushes the pocket. He's dominant on one-on-ones, splits double teams. He's almost unblockable for teams and absolutely has the power to wreck a game. And obviously with our revamped offensive line, a lot of new pieces in there, that's an area that teams are looking to exploit on Sunday. So I think how Robert Hainsey is able to hold up in the interior, and if they bring, other people to help, you have a running back chipping, or so you have another guy in there to help block him. But how that works out, and then I'm excited for the Levante David versus Aaron Jones matchup.
Yep.
I love me a good linebacker, running back duo.
That was going to be my pick, but I was going to say maybe Devin as well. That was it. Both of those two guys, because, Devin and Levante against AJ Dillon and Aaron, just both of them, the 2-on-2 essentially almost there.
But I think Levante will be great up against Aaron Jones because he's a guy that's known as one of the best off-ball linebackers in the league. He's so good in coverage against tight ends, against running backs, and especially in the way that they like to utilize Aaron Jones as a receiver. You have A.J. Dillon as well, but Aaron Jones is a little bit more nuanced in his route running. So having a guy like Levante David that's equally as good in wrapping up, being a textbook tackler, but also can draw it back and can cover a guy in man, I think is going to be really beneficial for the Bucs
I agree.
on Sunday.
Both of those Packers running backs are tied for leading their team in receptions.
Yeah.
Which, again, shows you just how crazy things have been
versatile,
over
yes.
there.
Yeah.
So I agree that if you can not only limit them in the run game, but, if you can shut down the ability for them to be that safety blanket, that's going to be very, very important. Okay, so we're going to do our final – this is our new segment we're debuting. We're calling it Quote of the Week.
Ooh, yes.
There's a lot of press conferences. There's a lot of media availability. It's hard to keep up with all of it. So we decided we're going to go over what our favorite quote we heard this week is. One, on the football side, I kind of talked about it earlier, but what Jamel Dean said about the way that he has changed how he is preparing.
Yes.
That was a big one for me. And then I have one that is not football related at all, but just made me laugh.
Ooh, yes, I love these.
So
go for it.
When we found out that Tom Brady is lending his Super Bowl rings to the World Cup to be displayed, I'm like, what? You're just going to just give all these rings
that?
over? And he's asked about it, and he said, quote, I just trust people. So I'm like, go for it. Don't lose it. I was like, can you imagine being the person on the other end of that quote that's just like being handed these rings, like, cool, just all of Tom Brady's Super Bowl rings. Just, I love it. I trust people, but don't lose it. I loved that quote so much. And I'm like, Brady is such a man of details and all of this. And yet I love that he's won so many that he's just like, sure. Like, it's fine.
Take it.
Whereas, like, I feel like my ring, I have
Would
locked
be in a
away.
safe.
Yeah, like, I have that thing where I haven't even,
like several levels.
I haven't even put it on. I have literally not put it on since receiving it because I am terrified. And I'm like, this is the difference in having one versus having 8 million. So that made me laugh. So that was my quote of the week. What is yours?
I would say mine, I had a couple, but I loved Carlton Davis was asked about the defense through the first 2 games. And I loved his mindset because I feel like it kind of embodies their entire mentality thus far. But he said, going up again. Oh, wait, hold on. We're going to go back. That's the other one. He said, I'm not really looking into the numbers of it. It's early. It's week 3. We have a long way to go before we start looking up at what we're doing. We have to be consistent at what we're doing to make it mean something. And I thought, it's like never getting too high and never getting too low. Yeah. We've held teams to 6.5 points through the first 2 games, but it's one thing to be able to gain that success, but it's quite another to be able to attain it.
Yes.
And so I think for him and the entire defense as a whole, it's about getting consistency and being able to do and have that production week in and week out. And I thought that was a great mindset for this team to have.
Yeah, that 2-0, we ain't done nothing yet.
Yes, exactly.
That's essentially the mindset. All right, well, that is going to do it for us on this edition of Tampa 2, heading into this finally a home game against the Packers. So excited to see all the fans out at Raymond James Stadium. We hope you guys have enjoyed this. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week.